But again, as I say, by a recent RBI report, TN accounts for 15% of all the factories in the country, which is the number one in the country. Even though we are not anywhere near 15% of the GDP of the country, we're probably closer to 10.5 or 11. And we have the maximum number of workers engaged in industry, about 2.2 million. We have been able to attract a lot of investment, partly because, as the chairman mentioned, or the previous chairman mentioned, we are in a very changing global order, and there's a lot of movement of capital, of capacity away from China, and India as a whole, and Tamil Nadu in particular, benefit from this. But in the last few months, maybe 14, 15 months, we've attracted about $10 billion of investments, creating about 2 lakh jobs or so. Now this, the last I checked, it was about a 40-45% increase year over year. I couldn't agree more that MSMEs are the backbone of our economy and our manufacturing capability, as the statistics we've cited in terms of the number of factories, the number of people employed, and the proportion of our total manufacturing that comes from them. We have multiple initiatives to support MSMEs. By coincidence, my expenditure secretary in the finance department is also the principal secretary for the MSME department, so I work very closely with him. And in fact, since I came to office, I take personal attendance in every SLBC, as it's called, State Level Banking Committee, which meets once in 3 months. And in that committee, we have actually undertaken a lot of initiatives to improve access to credit to MSMEs. There's good news and there's bad news. I would say that overall, Tamil Nadu is both above 100% credit to deposit ratio state. It has always been, and it continues to be, and it continues to improve slightly. So for every rupee of deposits, there's probably a rupee 10 or rupee 15 of credit extended. That's the good news. The bad news is, though the banks hit their targets every year, they only hit it in the volume of lending or the volume of credit extension. They fall far behind in the number of clients or the number of industries to be covered. And we keep reiterating to them that they should use better technology or more advanced technology to improve their KYC, to improve their credit committee approval process, to expand their client network, and to bring in more and more people into the fold. Now the state can help with some of that. We're working with them on some technology support. But I think also emerging technologies like fintech offer a huge opportunity. I was in Singapore earlier this year for some unrelated work, and I met with the head of the MAS's fintech initiatives. I had already served on several MAS committees and subcommittees when I was in Singapore, and I had not seen this kind of innovation that I saw this time. In the last 5 years, they've greatly increased the use of fintech in general and blockchain in particular. And particularly in the MSME sector, they use intra-MSME, that is, or inter-MSME, between themselves, their trading transactions. Their bills settle, their accounts and payables, and the speed with which they get done, and the efficiency of those transactions as a credit validator of these entities. So without waiting for one bank or one central kind of credit rating agency, the transactions between the MSMEs and between the MSMEs and the higher level OEM suppliers or manufacturing companies can be used to validate the creditworthiness and the financial standing of these companies. And I think those kinds of technologies have a lot of potential here, as I've discussed both with our MSME department and with the SLDC. I think Tamil Nadu is focusing a lot on fintech. As you know, we've announced a fintech park, and TIDCO is in the process of developing that. We hope that that will attract a lot of institutions, at least at a preliminary level. I've had interest from many of the biggest players in the world in the course of my interactions. Tamil Nadu has lagged a bit behind states like Karnataka or cities like Hyderabad broadly in the IT space. But when you come to banking and finance sector IT, I think Chennai and Tamil Nadu are second to none, particularly when it comes to the large banks, the hedge funds, the asset managers, the insurance companies and so forth. And we certainly hope to lever up on that towards a greater kind of scale in these areas. We will also set up specialist support entities in the Guidance Bureau as well as our other facilitation agencies to work on these priority sectors or areas of focus for us. Let me just conclude by saying something about the fiscal position of our state and where I see a key role for industry and for partners. As you know, it's very difficult to improve outcomes if you don't improve processes, right? There's no magic wand that you can just suddenly keep the same system and get better results. In that sense, it is very, very strong political leadership that allows the kind of path-breaking initiatives of reform, because the system is otherwise deadened by inertia. If you look at more than half the things the government does, it's either inefficient in design or well past its sell-by date. But the system continues along because nobody really wants to rock the boat. Nobody has the courage to take up an issue. Every time you try to do some reform, the few that benefit from it, mostly unfairly, definitely disproportionately, will raise a hue and cry as if the sky is falling. And the many that benefit will either not be aware of the impending benefits coming down the road or will not have the access to the ears of those in power to actually say, yes, thank you, please do it for me. So one of the big problems in democracy, this is not unique to Tamil Nadu, it's not unique to India, in all democracies, is that the rich and powerful and successful have access to the ears of the policymakers, the bureaucrats, and those who are left behind have very little access and very little voice, even though we run elections on a one man, one vote, one person, one vote basis. So in that sense, I would certainly say, as I've said before, my leader has relatively revolutionary intent. In his first address to our economic advisors, Esther Duflo, Raghuram Rajan, Arvind Subramanian, John Reyes, and Mr. S. Narayan, he set out a very clear vision that he wants to take Tamil Nadu to a certain place. And he said the exact words, he said, I realize these dreams of mine cannot be achieved through marginal reform. Let me assure you that Tamil Nadu stands ready to do whatever it takes. On that basis and with that support, I would say we in the finance department have been driving a lot of change. It's amazing to me how many things we have touched in 18 months. Sometimes there was an IMF team here with us for a year, and we just had a concluding dinner before they wrote their final report. And when we were just listening to them talk about how much change we have brought in 18 months, it was actually quite shocking to me that we've been able to do so much so quickly. But that's so much, we get such better results. I would say if we continue on this trend, then we're going to have some interesting dilemmas. But let me first talk about one thing. We talked about the increase in per capita GDP and how things have gone not so badly for our country. In the case of Tamil Nadu, as much as our GDP growth has slowed, so has our population growth also. So if you look at per capita GDP, Tamil Nadu has done relatively at the depth of the pandemic, it was 1% or so. Last year we've improved it to about 1.5%. This year we hope to take it back to about 2%. But on the trajectory that we are, either next year or the year after that, we will hit the revenue neutral target of the FRBM and our FRA Act. If we do that and the economy stays the way it is, then our capital expenditures are going to grow maybe 2x or 3x in a period of 3 years. So we're going to go from something like 35,000 crores a year to something like 90 or 95,000 crores a year in 3 years. That brings a whole lot of concerns to me, and I've expressed this to all the secretaries. The Chief Minister has asked me to chair a committee that looks at all infrastructure projects above 100 crores. And there's many of these projects for a total capex of 1,30,000 crores or something. And when we see the progress on those, it worries me to do that scale of capex, because over the years of decay in the fisc, the decay in the capex has brought the number to such a low capacity that it's not clear to me whether we can scale up that quickly. In addition, some things are better done by people as one of the leading organizations of such private institution capacity, as well as to look for innovative models of joint investment or joint financing and execution. So there are some things we can do better. We can raise capital, we can allocate equity, we can take risk. There are some things industry can do better in terms of maintenance, execution, professionalism, technology, etc. So we need to figure out some models as we go along. I'll close with only 2 points. Though for most people, capital and finance is a constraint, I would say that as far as the government of Tamil Nadu is concerned, though we are still not out of the woods, though we are still working through a huge problem where we had almost 3.5% revenue deficit and 4.6% or something fiscal deficit when we came to office, we are well on our path where we can see light at the end of the tunnel. So as I learned very recently at some other lecture, and then I went and did some research. At the depth of the Second World War in 1942, in an interview, the great economist Keynes has expressed this perspective that as far as government is concerned, and with the then existing itself global access to markets and financing and liquidity and all that, anything the government can actually do, it can afford to do. That's a radical concept. But the more I sit in this office, the more I realize that to be true. It is that ability to execute the intent without leakage, without kind of direction twisting, in the truest form. If you can execute something the way that you intend to execute it, in a way that strengthens democracy, increases equity, increases social justice, then surely we can afford to do it. Money is not the constraint as far as I can tell. And that's a profound learning for me, and I hope that with the right partnership, we will actually increase our ability to do things, to achieve results through execution capability. The second thing I would say is, should we feel a sense of urgency or not? Because at some level we see the global order in great flux. The China Plus One strategy helps us a lot. The scale of our country, our positioning in the kind of Quad, in another kind of G20 and so forth, gives us better access. On the other hand, one would say that we're looking at a demographic shift, and were we to not create enough jobs during this major shift, then we could end up with significant negative outcomes. So, I'm not going to opine one way or the other. This is the debate going. I'll just make a somewhat light-hearted but also somewhat serious point. About a month or 2 months ago, a very senior officer of the Union government, Tamil Nadu cadre, now on deputation, my friend Mr. T. Somnathan, the Union Finance Secretary, gave an address at the Chennai International Center at the MSME. It was a memorial address at the MSc, Madras School of Economics. And he argued that there is not really this great sense of urgency. It's not as if it's now or never. It's not as if we don't do it in the next 3 years or 5 years, or we don't hit this number, there's like doom ahead. And he gave various statistics covering centuries across many countries and continents to give the sense that we are heading in the right direction. Of course, we'd like to accelerate, but it's not as if there's like a narrowing window where if you don't do something of scale, the opportunity is lost forever. As just an audience member, I didn't want to divert the debate, so I didn't get into the Q&A in that place. But here I will say that I agree and I disagree. Right? I agree that there are many paths to success. There's not one that says if you don't do this, you're forever gone. But I will disagree on two levels. The first, I don't think there's any politician who doesn't want results tomorrow because we have to face elections day after. So we are all driven on a different time scale than a civil servant. I genuinely believe that with so many fair winds going our way, if this is not the time where on the one side we have all of these plus variables, and on the other hand we have all these unemployed youth, if we do not hit this acceleration point at this time, it's not clear to me when we will have a better kind of environment than this. So in that sense, I certainly feel a sense of urgency, at least as far as Tamil Nadu is concerned, to do this very quickly. Because we have a lot of unemployed, educated youth particularly, not particularly properly skilled, but educated. And that's why the CM has also focused on this non-Mudalvan scheme to better, to make the youth more employable and more industry ready or more economy ready. I say all this because I think that we can't take it for granted that the next few years will continue to see smooth sailing. We are in an unprecedented macroeconomic scenario. Between 2008 and before the COVID pandemic, there was already still probably 4 or 5 trillion of excess liquidity through monetary policy in the markets. COVID saw another huge surge, more rounds of QE, and something like now 8 trillion or something is the increased balance sheet of assets in the major central banks of the world compared to 2008. So there's all this excess liquidity sloshing around. The first 15 years or so, or 12 years or so, we escaped inflation because much of that liquidity ended up in the hands of people who were not going to consume with it. And it only ended up in the hands of investors. And so you saw asset prices, equity markets, debt markets, art, gold, all of these things went up, but you didn't see consumer price inflation. Now all of a sudden, after the fiscal stimulus that most governments made during COVID, and after it actually reached the hands of people who could spend it, you're seeing unprecedented inflation because you have this $1 trillion of fiscal stimulus and $8 trillion of excess liquidity. And all of a sudden, you're seeing inflation not seen in 30, 40, 50 years. And you're seeing strange outcomes in the market. The other day I saw 0.75%, 75, 76 basis points, which has not been seen since the Volcker days of stagflation, of fighting stagflation. So there's a reasonable risk that the global economy doesn't find a soft landing away from this extreme situation. And if so, that's another reason why we should have urgency. Of course, as I've said in many places, including the Assembly, as far as the state of Tamil Nadu is concerned, under the guidance of our Chief Minister, we have taken appropriate fiscal measures, including, as I say, rolling over unused debt capacity and a couple of others I don't want to get into. But therefore, I gave the assurance to the House, and I give it here, that were we to go into a global recession, that Tamil Nadu will be better buffered and better protected from the downsides compared to the national fisc or most other states. So that also gives me a sense of urgency. Though I'm hedged, I'd still like to make hay while the sun shines. Anyway, with those words, let me thank you again for inviting me, for giving me this time. I'm sure that CII will facilitate the interaction with government. We have a whole lot of advisory committees, one on federal fiscal relations led by Mr. Datta, the advisory committees for almost everything. That's the way we operate. We want to get, on Friday we're going to kick off the Tamil Nadu Climate Change Council with people like former Planning Commission Chairman Montex and Kalwalia and Eric Solheim, the UN Climate Change Ambassador. So we always look to get the best ideas from whoever feels they want to participate in the process. We don't think we have such a monopoly, and we look forward to working with you, and I hope that for all of you, this conclave will provide an opportunity to benefit and go back and improve your company's performance. I wish you all a successful event, and thank you once again.
Thank you, sir. We'd now like to invite our co-convener of the Economic Affairs and Policy Advocacy Panel, Mr. D.C. Datta, to kindly give the concluding remarks.
Dr. Thiagarajan, popularly known as PTR, Honorable Minister for Finance and Human Resources, Government of Tamil Nadu, Mr. T.T. Ashok, past Chairman, CIA Southern Region, also Managing Director, Tyler and Rubber Private Limited, Mr. Gopal Mahadevan, convener of this year Economic Affairs and Policy Advocacy Panel, CIA Tamil Nadu, and also Director and CFO of Ashok Lela. Members from industry, speakers, special invitee speakers, friends from ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning to all of you, and welcome once again. I thank the Honorable Brian Finance Minister for his presence today, accepting despite his busy schedule. Thank you, sir. And we are very sure that with your excellent leadership and support,